Are you a parent of a child or a teenager that has a disability? Do you go to those ARD and IEP meetings and you're absolutely lost? You're so lost that you're thinking they might not even be speaking English. You don't know what language they're speaking. If you watch my last video, you may remember that FAPE means a free and appropriate education. But what does appropriate actually mean? How do you quantify the word appropriate? Well, darling, you just asked the million-dollar question. More school districts, IEP and ARD committees, and parents argue over the word appropriate when it comes to a free and appropriate public education than possibly any other part of the federal law known as IDEA. By the end of this video, you'll know what is considered an appropriate public education for your child, the often explosive argument over the word appropriate in court, what the Supreme Court of the United States had to say about the word appropriate, when to hire an advocate to help ensure that your child is receiving an appropriate public education, and when you should go to court. I'll even add a link to my website at secondarysped911.com in the description box below, where you can read the exact decision that the Supreme Court issued after reviewing a special education case arguing over an appropriate education in 2017. Hi, I'm Donna Ernest. I talk about special education every week. I'm so glad you found my channel. If you are a parent that has a teenager that's going through that transition between childhood and adulthood, then subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you'll be the first to know when a new video gets uploaded on Mondays. The IDEA Act of 2004 says that all children with disabilities between the ages of 3 and 21 are entitled to a free and appropriate public education known as FAPE. Go check out my video on how special education is free in public schools by clicking on the image of it at the end of this video or by clicking on the link in the description box below. The federal law known as IDEA is explicit in stating that the education that a student receiving special education services has to be appropriate. This means that special education teachers in public schools have to teach children with special needs in a bona fide, legitimate, research-based manner. The teachers have to provide physical or digital evidence that direct instruction is taking place every day that the student is in school. In other words, special education teachers are required to teach students with special needs the same exact content that their friends are learning in the regular classrooms. Now, some special ed students are included in regular classrooms, and some are in resource rooms, and some are in self-contained rooms for whatever reason that your IEP committee or your ARD committee decided. But the content is going to be the same for the student with special needs. It's just brought to whatever their level is. So if everybody else is in the 9th grade, but this student is reading on a 4th grade level, well, if they're doing a grammar lesson, they'll learn the same, verb tense or whatever, but the student with special needs may have sentences that are on the 4th, 5th grade level, wherever they are, whereas the other kids in the same room or on the same grade level are just doing theirs on the 9th grade level. So they're learning the same thing, but they're on their level. One thing that public schools cannot do is put the special ed kids in a room back in the back or a temporary building back in the back and let them watch SpongeBob cartoons and eat snacks all day. That is not an appropriate education. Our responsibility as public schools on the secondary level is to make sure that the students that are age 13 and older are being prepared for adulthood. And that includes independent living skills, academic skills, and the social skills that it's going to take in order for them to be able to live successfully and independently when they become adults. It gets tricky here because IDEA doesn't specifically say what defines an appropriate education for students with special needs. The teacher has his or her idea of what the word means. The district has another idea due to state and stakeholder mandates and directives. Parents have their own idea of what they want to see done for their child or teenager. And the student, of course, has his or her own ideas. This potential for conflict can be de-escalated at the IEP or ARD committee meeting. Here's what happens typically at an IEP meeting. Texas viewers, remember the IEP meeting is called an ARD meeting. It's the same exact thing as an IEP meeting. If you live in Texas, you know how we like to do things our own way. At the ARD or IEP meeting, you have certain people at the table who have various roles and job titles. They're the decision-making representative for each part of the student's educational experience. Once a child turns 13 in Texas and 16 in some other states, the student comes in these meetings and makes decisions with the adults. I'll produce a video at another date explaining the role of each of these people, but for now, understand that everyone's input is critical to get a full picture of what the student's strengths and needs are. Once everything is literally laid out on the table, the committee creates and votes on an educational plan designed specifically for that individual student for the coming year. That individualized education plan, or IEP, is mandated by federal law under IDEA to be educationally appropriate for the student to be successful in school. Okay, so how do you know if an IEP is appropriate or not? That's a great question. And the answer is critical to knowing if an IEP needs to be changed, or if a special ed teacher needs to start advocating for their student, or if a parent needs to start fighting for their child's rights. And the answer is data. No one can argue with data which has been gathered with fidelity and can be validated by other professionals. This means that a highly trained special education teacher who is diligent to take data carefully to show evidence of student progress in learning knows within a couple of weeks whether the IEP is working or not. School administrators, this is what you should look for in a special education teacher candidate. Ask to see how they take data. If the IEP is working, the data charts will show a beautiful trend line showing student growth. Test scores and other assessment tools should reflect this growth. Whatever it is that the IEP or ARD committee designed for the student is considered appropriate if the committee members can demonstrate positive growth in student learning. If the trend line on the data sheets is flatlining, or worse, going down, the special education team has the responsibility to schedule another IEP or ARD meeting to change the IEP goals and objectives written into the IEP. It is absolutely okay for any member of the IEP or ARD committee to say, hey, I've been following the IEP faithfully for a quarter, and I haven't seen any growth. Can we reconvene? It's a pain to reconvene at an ARD or IEP meeting, and a lot of times school administrators fight it for whatever reason. Usually it's just the time and the paperwork and everything that's involved in getting the IEP together. However, if a student is struggling, then they're not receiving an appropriate education, and at any time, anybody on the IEP team can call to go back to the drawing board, basically, to find something else that might help the student be successful. And the data will show it. Parents and teachers, this is where you advocate for that student. You either advocate and fight for that student's rights and that the appropriate education for them yourself, or you hire a disability advocate who can help get whatever the student needs. Please remember that special education is student-centered. It's not professionally centered, and it's not school-centered. We are all there in the ARD committee or the IEP committee in the best interest of the student. And a disability advocate may be what you need in order to minister to the administrators there on behalf of the student. If a student isn't making progress, this is the time when the ARD committee or IEP committee needs to get together. It's not the time to be having a lot of drama and door slamming and screaming and all that kind of stuff. We need to find out what's going on with that kiddo and give him or her the help that they need. If you do end up going to court, make sure you have a lot of evidence. All of your emotions are going to be dismissed, but that data is what's going to stick in court. Now I want to tell you about a case that made it all the way up to the Supreme Court back in 2017. The case is known as Endrew F. versus Douglas County School District. Endrew was diagnosed with autism early. His parents enrolled him in their local public school as a kindergartner. Endrew had trouble in school all the way through elementary school. His parents argued that Endrew wasn't receiving an appropriate education, but the school insisted that he was. Frustrated, the parents withdrew Endrew from the public school and enrolled him in a private school in the 5th grade. Endrew flourished in this school, which provided evidence in the parents' minds that Endrew hadn't received an appropriate education at the public school. The parents sued the school district for the cost of private school tuition. The school district refused to pay for Endrew's tuition, so the parents took the school district to court. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS actually remanded, which means they didn't make a ruling. They decided to turn the case back down to the lower courts, saying that justices knew law, but they didn't know much about special education. However, the phrase that stood out amongst the justices during deliberations was the Latin phrase de minimis. In English, this means the bare minimum. The lower courts were ruling that public schools were required to provide at least the minimum amount of educational benefit to students with special needs. The school district was able to demonstrate that they had provided more than de minimis educational benefit to Endrew. The parents argued that this was obviously not enough for Endrew. In typical character, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg debated de minimis, saying that educational benefit had to be substantive, meaty, having substance, rigorous. In other words, the education provided to a student with disabilities has to be substantially better than whatever the minimum requirements might be. This SCOTUS decision was a major victory for children with special needs and clearly told public schools to give their SPED population the best education possible to help them be successful in school and life.